Mrs. Stokely, when she was talking about the rocket's red glare and the bombs bursting in air, and she went like this. I thought that was quite good. I also need to thank Mr. Damjanovic for not putting me after January, because this mute Irishman could never have followed January. On occasions like this, I am reminded of the musical, The Fiddler on the Roof. And the main character in The Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye, he talks about tradition. Tradition. In fact, the entire musical is about tradition. That's what this is today. This is a great American tradition. The tradition of Veterans Day. It traces its roots back to Armistice Day, the day that World War I, or as it was known back then, the Great War, ended. The Great War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And so on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was declared, ending the Great War. And that's why we celebrate what became later Veterans Day on the 11th of November. And we're just shy of the 11th hour. Well, the war to end all wars, the Great War, as it turned out, didn't. It didn't end all wars. And so after World War II, which was more vast than World War I, and after the Korean War, the decision was made to change Armistice Day to Veterans Day. To not just honor our World War I veterans, but to honor veterans of all of our wars. So tradition, the tradition of Veterans Day. I am so pleased that Belgrade, Montana has this level of support for our veterans. There are other traditions in the military and in America. Some of them go back hundreds and hundreds of years, like the tradition of saluting. Initially, people saluted by putting up their hand, usually right, because everybody was right-handed back there. Because even if you were left-handed, you had to be right-handed. And it was a symbol of, I don't have my weapon. I am friendly. Do not be concerned. Whether my weapon is a rock, or a sword, or a rifle. It was like this. And over time, it became something a little more formal, like this. And depending upon what service you're in and what country you're from, people saluted differently over times. But it was, and still is, a great tradition. There are other traditions that are not anywhere near as old as the tradition of saluting. One of my favorites is the Air Force tradition of the Finney Flight. The Finney Flight is a celebration of a person's final flight in that particular squadron. And so in a Finney Flight, when you land, you taxi back to the Chalks, and the entire squadron meets you. And 3 or 4 lieutenants with fire extinguishers loaded with water, or a fire truck if you happen to be a big shot, meet you at the Chalks and hose you down as you climb out of the jet and get down the ladder. A great, heartwarming tradition. More heartwarming in July than January, I assure you, but a heartwarming tradition nonetheless. Another tradition, not anywhere near as famous as saluting or the Finney Flight, was introduced to me when I was stationed in Korea. And like many of my stories that begin with, when I was in Korea, this one is humorous. When I was in Korea, I was on a staff assignment. I didn't get to fly the Mighty Strike Eagle at that time. I was attached to a fighter squadron that flew F-16s. And that fighter squadron, the 36th Fighter Squadron, which has roots all the way back to World War I, and Teddy Roosevelt's son, Quentin Roosevelt. The Fiends, as they were called, the 36th Fighter Squadron Fiends, had a tradition. And that tradition was really more of a custom. And that tradition was that what was called the Poncho Clause. And the Poncho Clause is affectionately named after the Poncho Clause and the Fish Clause. The Poncho Clause is, any story worth telling is worth telling well. and the fish half of the clause and go take all night telling it. So I'm going to try to keep up with the fish half of the poncho clause, and I won't take up all your time, but I do want to share a couple of things. Any story worth telling is worth telling well. What does the poncho clause have to do with Veterans Day in Belgrade, Montana? Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that these great Americans gathered in front of us have a story worth telling. They have a story